Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is Victor Shi. It is Wednesday, May 31st. There is some good news, which is that it seems like we are avoiding a default that could have led to an economic catastrophe. But with all the talk about where this is kind of going in the debt ceiling bill, my question is, what is actually in this bill? How should we in the media be talking about this entire process and reaching this point? And joining me to discuss this is someone who I am sure all of you have watched on MSNBC, and he is Ali Velshi. He is the host of Velshi on Saturday and Sunday mornings. Ali, thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's so great to see you.
Victor, good to be with you. We have a newsy week that we've finally arrived at being together on.
Yes, absolutely. Well, before I ask you about this debt ceiling deal, I want to ask you about this moment because honestly, it feels like kind of eerily similar. The president and Congress duke out the debt limit bill basically every year. At the final hour, they reach some sort of agreement and then increase the debt limit. Here we are now. All that concern that maybe we had them in the media that I had seems to be largely gone with this new bill. Is there anything different this time around compared to previous times?
Yeah. So first of all, it's BS that we do this, right? There are only two countries in the world that have a process by which they determine after they have spent their money whether or not they will pay their bills. That's not whether we pay our bills, it's whether the Treasury can borrow enough money to pay the bills. So the net result is it's us and Denmark. Denmark's limit is so high that they will likely never reach it. And if they have to, they'll do it one time and fix it. Yeah. This is not the process by which one should determine whether or not government spends too much or too little money or raises too much or too little money. So there are two problems here. One is there are very few things that Congress has to do in the Constitution, but one of them is that it has to appropriate money. Right. So there is a process. It is called the budgeting process and the ways and the appropriations process. There are different committees for this. And that's where that debate should take place. So we have a system whereby the president puts forward a budget, Congress argues with the president for several months, and then we have a budget. That system has been broken for years, if not decades, in America. It just doesn't work. So what's happened is this has replaced it. This has been the place that generally speaking, Republicans, but sometimes Democrats, use as a place to say, we're doing this all wrong. And it's the wrong place to do that because paying our debts is one of the very few things that America has done right since day one, right? It has always paid its debts on time. The debt limit is about 95 years old. But around, in the late 60s and early 70s, we got off the gold standard, right? The idea that you could only have as much money as there was gold in Fort Knox to back that money up. And we got off of that, and people would say, this is going to be mayhem. Money will be worth nothing. American bonds, treasury bonds will be worth nothing because there's nothing to hold it to account. And that didn't turn out to happen. Why? Because of something called the full faith and credit of the United States. The idea was the United States is the best bet in the world. So people who don't like America, who don't like its leaders, who don't like its politics, countries who don't like them, they all buy American treasuries because it is the safest bet in the world. The reason it's the safest bet in the world is it always gets paid. And the consequence of it being the safest bet in the world is that it pays lower interest than anything else in the world. It is the lowest interest bearing thing that you can buy because you'll always get paid. That is too big a thing to mess with. And that's why this shouldn't have happened in the first place. There shouldn't be a debate about increasing the debt ceiling. There should be a debate about how you fix the budget. Now, again, the Republicans have phrased this as we spend too much money, we have to cut spending. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is we don't raise enough money. Anybody who budgets for themselves has the same discussion, right? If you can't meet your bills, you either reduce your expenditures or you increase your income. There are two ways of solving this problem. There are good faith debates on both sides, but there's a budgeting process and an appropriations process for that. Neither of them are this. So the fact that we are even discussing this means that we're not discussing other things, and that's generally bad.
That is some amazing context. And as you were saying that, I mean, I can't help but think about the fact that Kevin McCarthy and Republicans under the Trump years raised to increase the debt ceiling 3 times. So, I mean, if you're talking about increased spending, they did that under Trump. And so I'm wondering what the kind of debate was under this president. Was this all politics, do you think? Why was there such a debate this time around?
Well, because you have this, what I and others call the chaos caucus, right? You've got 18 to 20 members on the Republican side who don't seem to be governed by governing. So they're a subset of the Freedom Caucus, which was a sort of an offshoot of the Tea Party, and they had some legitimate beliefs, right, about small government, lower costs, fiscal responsibility. That's all fine, but the chaos folks. The Freedom Caucus and the Tea Party wanted to do this through legislative means within the system. The Chaos Caucus doesn't seem to care. They will burn the house down even if they're in it. So I think there's that. I think there's a general misunderstanding of budgeting and economics and the dangers of having played with this debt ceiling. In fact, one time in I think it was 1970, we had an inadvertent debt ceiling problem. It wasn't a political discussion. There was something technical that happened, and for a few days we went into a problem. There are economists who say we're still paying the price because of higher interest rates all the way from then. In 2000, and I think it was 2011 or 2008, the one time when we got within 72 hours of the debt ceiling, interest rates went up and it cost us jobs and more money. So this is just a dangerous thing to play with. We're in an economy that is pretty strong right now. We got very low unemployment. We've got inflation coming down a bit. We're going at a good pace. This is like tripping a runner when they're going 60 miles an hour, right? It hurts more than if you trip someone when they're going at a slow walk. So it is very, very dangerous that we're doing this right now. But there are a bunch of people, particularly in the Republican conference, who don't seem to care. McCarthy's not one of them. I mean, he cares. McConnell cares. Lots of Republicans care. But there are a group of them who simply don't care. They're prepared to torch the place. In all of our prior debt ceiling negotiations, that hasn't been the case. It's still been a bad discussion to be discussing spending and income at the time when you should be discussing the debt ceiling. But there seems to be a bad faith element to what's going on right now.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get into what's actually in the bill because President Biden has acknowledged this, and this is a bill that not everyone will agree with, and that's exactly the essence of kind of government. But in your view, what are some of the top lines that the American people should know about in terms of what's in this bill?
Well, the stuff that Democrats in particular, progressives don't like, is that there's been an increase in work requirements for receiving federal aid. Now, generally speaking, there are already work requirements for federal aid. This is just going to cause more of them. Now, the Republican argument is that it'll cause more people to work. Now, here's why this isn't true. First of all, we have a 3.5% unemployment rate. Most people are working. Number two, there have been studies shown that indicate that when you put these work requirements in place, the reason that the people who are not working to receive benefits are generally not working to receive benefits. It might be medical problems. It might be childcare. It might be that some people who are receiving SNAP, food stamps, for instance, are already working. They just don't make enough money to pay their bills and feed their kids. We have a higher poverty rate than most developed countries in the world. I think we're the fourth highest in the entire world. So all this is going to serve to do is get people falling off those roles. So it'll save money because the least among us will suddenly get less government assistance. And that's a fact. So the point is, if your goal is to save money, my argument is, why do we always pick on the least among us? Why do we always pick on these people? During COVID, when we were talking about giving everybody $600 a month, we debated this for months and months and months. We don't debate it when a bank needs bailing out. Somehow that happens within 48 hours. So I think there's just this priority sense. And Matt Gaetz has coined the term couch potatoes now, which is, I think, the modern version of welfare queens. It was BS then, it's BS now. This is, we have more jobs available than there are Americans to fill them. And the problem is they're mismatched. They're either geographically mismatched or they're training mismatched. That's a great problem to solve. That would be an amazing problem to solve. But we don't have couch potatoes. They're not of consequence, and they're the least among us. They're earning the least amount of money. So that's what Democrats are mad at. And by the way, if you want to balance your budget or you want to increase your income, why not raise taxes on corporations who avoid them or things like that? So that's what there are some Democrats who are saying we won't support this because we're mad at it. Republicans, mostly the Republicans who are mad at this are the Republicans on the far right who wanted all the things that they wanted. They wanted a balanced budget. They wanted all sorts of things that were not only unreasonable in this context, but they are for another context. So I think you got people on both sides who are unhappy with it. I don't think you've got enough people unhappy on both sides to scuttle the deal. But that's yet to be seen. This isn't over till it's over.
So you have opinions on both sides, and you also have Kevin McCarthy and Republicans, or I guess maybe more Republicans in the middle, who are framing this as a complete slam dunk for Republicans, and there's nothing in this bill for Democrats. And I'm wondering, how should the media be covering this debt limit bill and what's in it? Because Kevin McCarthy wants people to believe that's all him and Republicans, and it seems like that's not true. And it appears, if anything, that Republicans lost more than President Biden did.
Yeah, I look, a perfect win would be to have just had a clean debt limit increase. So my view on this is that this shouldn't have been a discussion. I'm an economics guy. I'm very big on having a discussion about whether we should spend more, spend less, raise more, or raise less. That's just not supposed to happen in this environment. So a win for Biden would have been nothing other than a debt limit increase. A win for the Chaos Caucus would have been a whole lot of cuts and a whole lot of changes. So they're both right that they didn't get what they wanted, but everybody got the right thing, and that is that the debt limit will be increased and we will not default on our payments on June 5th, assuming this all continues to go as planned. That I would take as a general win. Kevin McCarthy has a harder road to hoe than Biden does, right? Biden's able to say we didn't get everything we wanted. Kevin McCarthy has got to remember, he won on his 15th ballot because these 20 Republicans kept him from doing so. So he's got Joe Biden, who has to satisfy the progressives in his party. His progressives in his party are not looking to torch the place. They just want they want to shift the conversation farther to the left. The problem that Kevin McCarthy's got is bigger, which is why it's probably politically more important for McCarthy to say that he won more than he actually did.
And it seems like there are now increasing calls to, maybe not fully, but there are some Republicans who are suggesting the possibility of a motion to vacate. And we all remember that one vote. Part of the deal seemed to be a one-member motion to vacate. So I don't know if this week might be the last week of Kevin McCarthy on the job, but it seems like his job security is on the line.
Joe Biden doesn't worry that he's only worries whether he's going to be the next president of the United States. He generally speaking is going to be this president of the United States. He doesn't have to worry about that job on a weekly basis. Kevin McCarthy actually does. That's the problem. Everything that Kevin McCarthy does depends on a few people helping him out. Now there are, I don't know, 17 or 18 Republicans who won their seat in districts that Joe Biden had won in 2020. So they're somewhat vulnerable. They tend to take a more reasonable view of things. There are a larger number of Republicans, or some overlap, who are members of the so-called problem solvers caucus. So they tend to be in constant conversation with Democrats, also more reasonable. So there are more moderate Republicans in the Republican conference than there are chaos people. There are under 20 chaos people. There are more than 30 moderates. So I think McCarthy's probably safe for now. But when you have 20 people in your caucus who are prepared to revolt, it generally didn't happen with the Democrats. It did happen once with Nancy Pelosi a few years ago. When you've got that many people who are constantly saying, do it my way, or maybe we're going to kick you out, it becomes hard to govern.
Absolutely. Well, the last question I have for you on this topic is, where does this process go from here? It seems like today the House is going to vote on this bill, and then it probably goes to the Senate. Where does it go from there? And then also, what should be some reforms to the process? I know we talked about the process of this debt limit ceiling, how we shouldn't even be having this debate. What are some of the options we should be considering maybe for next year or the years to come?
Well, it's not in the Republicans who could change this right now. There's no motivation for them to change it. This is very good leverage to have over the president. So why would they change it? There are criticisms to say when the Democrats controlled the whole process, why didn't they change it? It's just a dumb system. And every time it comes up, we realize that it's a dumb system. I've had some discussions this weekend with Republicans who say it's a good system because it causes us to be accountable in a very urgent fashion. The budget process is a many, many months long process, and it's the opposite of urgent. Like nobody pays attention to it. It doesn't get covered on the news because it's so slow moving. It happens behind closed doors. I don't buy that argument. I don't think government should be run on the basis of urgency because we're about to collapse our economy by not paying our bills. But, here's the problem, Victor. If you wanted to reform things, what would you reform first? Would you reform the electoral system, the electoral college? Would you reform voting rights? Would you enact laws to protect women who need to have abortions? Would you collect, statistics on police violence against people of color? Or would you fix the the debt limit problem. You know what I mean? Like, if
Right.
we were in the business, I would love to see a candidate run for office to say, here's all the things that don't work in our political system. And including, by the way, our electrical grid has to be fixed and our climate needs to be fixed. And I'm going to run on all of these. But I think you and I are both going to be long dead before that happens. The idea of actually just fixing government does not seem to be high on anybody's agenda right now, which I think is sad, because most people, until Donald Trump, most people didn't take this stuff seriously anyway. They didn't really realize what all this broken government stuff is all about. Now we realize it actually imperils us, and it also hurts democracy, because we're realizing how out of sync with our lives and the way we think and the priorities we have government is, right? So most Americans want climate change dealt with, and yet there's no meaningful legislation to do so, other than some stuff that President Biden has done. Most Americans would like measures of gun control put in, and yet no meaningful legislation on that front, other than one piece of legislation that Biden administration did. Most Americans do not want the criminalization of abortion, and yet no meaningful legislation on that side. Because once you start looking at it, you realize, oh, it's never going to work, because the system's broken. It's not representative of American people, and fixing that is a bigger effort than, one has to be determined to that. When you can't get things done, like even raising the debt ceiling, the concept of reforming the system is too distant.
It is so distant. And this brings me to the last thing I want to talk to you about, which is banning books, because you mentioned how I wish we also lived in a system where we had elected officials who actually cared about, actually governing and fixing the problems that are facing our democracy. But you also have Republicans now across the country who are trying to ban books simply because it doesn't align with their political ideology. And you have a great segment on your show called Velshi's Ban Book Club. Talk to us about this idea of banning books now simply because it doesn't align with their political ideology, and what can kind of everyday Americans who see this do about this problem?
Well, this is my whole shelf is all my banned books. I do one every week, and it's kind of remarkable, because when we do them, the books sell. So it's a nice middle finger to those people who like to ban it. There are less than a handful of groups in America who are behind almost all the book banning. It's form letters that they sign. This is not a good faith effort. This is not parents who are showing up at school board interviews or things like that, school board meetings, to say that they find this particular book troublesome. All books are banned for the same reason all books have always been banned. People are prudes. There's some fear that if your child reads a book about a penguin with two dads, they're suddenly going to be gay. It's the other that we don't know about. And there's another piece of this. And, my first banned book was the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones. And, Nicole Hannah-Jones introduced in a series of articles in the New York Times Magazine this idea that let's not think of 1776 as when it started. Let's go back to 1619, when the first enslaved people arrived in America. And when I interviewed her very early on, while this was still just a newspaper article, not a book and a thing, I remember thinking to myself, wow, I didn't know this fact. I just didn't know. 1619 was not a relevant piece of information to me. Thank you for putting another piece of information into my corpus of knowledge. Yeah. That was my reaction. But to some people, knowledge is a zero-sum game. So if you start thinking about 1619, that somehow challenges 1776. Now, you have to have a very small brain the size of a chickpea to believe that to be true, right? That I can't take another date and a concept and hold that in my mind. Sure, the hard drive gets full and some nonsense can fall out, but there's a lot of nonsense that I see on TikTok and Instagram that can fall out in favor of real knowledge. But there's a sense that when you teach people Latin American history, or history about Hispanics, or Black people, or queer people, or Asians, or you name it, that you are somehow affecting the main narrative. And the fact is, the victor, writes the narrative. So what we have in America is stories. You go up the street here in New York, you got Columbus Circle, right? We got Christopher Columbus. Well, we've all learned things about Christopher Columbus in the last decade or so that maybe wouldn't have us have Christopher Columbus up as a statue in the middle of Manhattan. Maybe not. That's a valid discussion. But what we're learning about that, what we're learning about the Confederate statues in the South, is that there are more narratives. There's a lot of stuff, and maybe smart people can hold 2 or 3 narratives at the same time, and maybe we can debate them actively. But banning books is about not debating them actively. Yeah. It's about taking it out of the debate. Now, if you're a conservative and you believe in small government, that parents should make decisions, not their kids, what are you doing banning books? Let the parents make the decisions. So what people can do, you asked me, they can, first of all, they can still buy the books, or get them from the library, assuming the libraries allow them to have those books. They can go to their libraries and talk about what this situation is. Talk to the head librarian about is there any pressure on you to ban books? Can you contribute to your library in a way that supports their efforts? Are there petitions to sign? You can go to your school board meetings. You can go to your PTA meetings. You can get involved. You can run for local office. You can support a candidate for local office, particularly at the municipal level or at the school board level, who stands on the basis of not banning books. We're just not banning books. This is America. We have a First Amendment. Most Western democracies do not have a First Amendment or something in the Constitution that guarantees the freedom of speech. I come from Canada. We don't have something like that. But by the way, we don't ban books in Canada either. So, but it's actually a tenet of our democracy, not banning books. It's also an impulse of the worst things that have happened in history, including the Nazis burning books. Right? Banning books to burning books is not that much of a leap. So here's my thing. It's like abortion. If you don't like abortion, Victor, don't have an abortion. If you don't want to read books about queer penguins, don't read books about queer penguins. But let's not take these things out of the public discourse. Let there be a book about queer penguins if someone is interested in that area of study. Might be relevant. I don't know if it's relevant or not. I'm not an expert on it, but it doesn't occur to me that because I'm not an expert on it, doesn't challenge my life, does nothing to me. And I interview all of these authors, and I ask them. People say this is not appropriate for a 9-year-old child, and the authors tell me it's absolutely not appropriate for a 9-year-old child. That's not what it's for, right? But let's have parents involved in making those decisions. Parents and teachers involved in making those decisions for their kids. Taking it away from parents and teachers is exactly the same as taking abortion decisions away from women and their doctors and having them done in legislatures. Some things, particularly for small government conservatives out there, should not be done by your state legislatures or your city councils. They should be done by parents and teachers. They should be done by women and their doctors. So this is a terrible overreach. But you know what? If you can get your book banned, Victor, I'll have you on my show and we'll sell a lot of copies.
Sounds good. We have a deal there. But I mean, the fact that you mentioned this happening on the local and state level, I mean, local and school board level, I think is so important, because if there's anything that hopefully can be shown through this process, it's the importance of those elections and hopefully getting more people to run in those positions, because they are so important. As we can see now, they're focused on pretty much all the wrong things, at least in those Republican areas. But
here's the neat thing. What I've done in the last couple of months is I've seen nothing but young people in the Tennessee legislature, Frost in Florida, in various legislatures around the country, young people who are out there saying, we'll fight for this stuff. My fear, Victor, is that young people would disengage. They'd say, this process is so stupid that I'm not going to get engaged, but they're getting engaged. So that's what I want to see. Young people running for office at the municipal level, at the school board level, then at the state level. These state legislatures are where all this stuff is going down, by the way. It's not happening in Congress. You have places like South Carolina, North Carolina, perfect example. Super majority of Republicans in the state legislature and the Senate, and yet Democratic governor, Democratic attorney general, statewide office held by Democrats because of gerrymandering. So the effect you can have being involved in school boards, in local elections, and in state elections is substantially greater than you can have in a congressional election or a presidential election. And yet people don't get involved on that front. So I really think when it comes down to citizenship, that is your obligation. Go out there. I don't care what side of the issue you're on. Go out there, be involved in debate. Stop having people make decisions for you.
I think that is the perfect way to end this. Ali, thank you so much for joining me this morning and talking about the debt ceiling and banning books. It was such a pleasure to have you on.
Always great, Victor. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, Ali is always amazing, and we'll see where this process goes from here in terms of the debt ceiling. Like I said earlier in the episode, there will be a vote today. The time, I don't know quite yet, but there will be a vote in the House to vote on this final deal. Yesterday, it passed out of the Rules Committee, which is a key vote. Now it's onto the House floor where they're going to vote on it, and I'm sure we will see many fireworks from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and some of the people that Ali was talking about in that Freedom Caucus in the Republican Party. Probably those same people who tried to crumble Kevin McCarthy McCarthy's bid to become Speaker will probably be also the same people who try to make a mockery out of this whole process on the House floor. So we'll be watching that very closely. I'll be back the rest of this week on Thursday and Friday with new episodes of On the Move. Tomorrow, I will be joined by Chasten Buttigieg to talk about a lot of the anti-LGBTQ plus attacks in states around the country, also in Target, why more Republicans and people are concerned about Target selling LGBTQ plus paraphernalia and apparel, and why they aren't focused on maybe more important things. So we'll talk about that, why that must end. And then on Friday, I'm going to have on Representative Daniel Goldman from the great state of New York. He's going to join me to talk about everything that's happening in the House. Hopefully by then we will get to a debt limit deal and the House will vote on it, the Senate will pass it, and President Biden will have signed it. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some of the committees that Republicans are now launching and investigations that they're launching. So join us then and some of just the great work that Representative Daniel Goldman is engaging in. So we've got some great episodes for you every day right here on youtube.com/Politicon or on Twitter, which hopefully you're watching on Twitter now. We are that is a new thing that we're doing. So you can tune in on Twitter or on YouTube at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. And thank you all so much for watching this episode of On the Move. I will see you all tomorrow.